Morning glory and evening grace, American. Hugh Hewitt. Welcome to a special edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show, The Great God Debate. A 3-hour exchange of views between Christopher Hitchens and Dr. Mark Roberts. Christopher Hitchens, a graduate of Oxford, of course, longtime journalist, Vanity Fair columnist, author of many books and collections of essay, including a biography of Thomas Jefferson, author of America, and most recently, God is Not Great, last week, the #1 selling nonfiction book in America. Dr. Roberts, frequent guest on this program, is a graduate of Harvard College and also received his Ph.D. from Harvard. He is a pastor, a professor, a blogger, and the author of 6 books. His latest is available this week, in fact, Can We Trust the Gospels? Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Christopher, good to have you back on.
Very nice to have me back.
And Mark, good to have you back as well.
Thank you, and Christopher, it's nice to meet you electronically.
Thank you for saying so.
I set up this debate with the help of my internet friends by suggesting I would be offering propositions to you both and then having you comment on each of them as we go forward and then cross-comment. In the course of 15 segments, I hope to get through at least a dozen of these. Many are drawn from Christopher Hitchens' new book. Some are drawn from my having read Mark's manuscript, although that's not available yet to Christopher, so I'm going to minimize that a little bit. I want to begin, though, by asking a question of Christopher Hitchens and Mark Roberts that comes from Christopher's brother Peter in the Daily Telegraph this week, where he writes, where is Christopher's certain knowledge of what is right and wrong supposed to have come from? Christopher Hitchens, how do you respond to your brother?
Well, it's the most commonly asked question of unbelievers, or perhaps I should say atheists. And I regard it, though you put it very politely, as a slightly insulting one. The suggestion that you make is that if I don't respect a celestial dictatorship that's unalterable, nothing is going to prevent me from lying, cheating, raping, thieving, and so on. Well, I can't exactly tell you why I don't do those things, or why I enjoy, say, going to give blood, which I do. After all, I don't really lose a pint, but somebody gains one, and I have a rare blood group, and I might need some blood one day myself, so it seems an all-round very satisfying transaction. In a sense, do I need to say much more than that?
Dr. Roberts, does he?
Well, on one hand, no. I think that there are certainly moral, good people who believe all kinds of things, including atheism. In fact, I have sometimes said that I sometimes believe Christians kind of rely on God and need God here because they actually are not as good people as folk who are not believers, and somehow we need a little extra help. I think the problem is not that there aren't atheists and others who are moral and live morally. I think the problem would come if somebody who disagreed on a matter of ethics and said, well, I understand that you, Christopher, believe I shouldn't, shoot this innocent person, but in my view, I think I should shoot this innocent person. I'm not sure how, and I'd be interested, how would you say to that person at that point, no, you shouldn't, and here's why you shouldn't?
Well, I think I would probably be capable of giving some good reasons. I think, well, one thing, it would be an outrage to their conscience. Let's not consider the interest of the other person for a moment. And after all, some people do need to be shot, but you stipulated innocence. Well, it would be an outrage to your conscience, and for some reason we are aware of doing ill or doing good. The test I apply in my book, the fairly good pragmatic American test, is what do you do when no one's looking? The fact is someone is looking. You have an internal conversation with yourself where you don't want to look or feel bad. I don't think this comes from God. I think it comes as part of our evolution. Darwin points out, and others have noticed since, that there are animals who behave ethically to one another. They have solidarity, they have family groups, they seem able to feel sympathy. They certainly come to each other's aid, in the case of some of the higher mammals. I think our morality evolved, and I don't believe that my Jewish ancestors thought that perjury and murder and theft were okay until they got to Mount Sinai and were told no dice. But there's another insulting, if I may say this, implication to the question, which is that those who do subscribe to the idea of an all-seeing permanent surveillance from a celestial dictatorship are therefore going to behave well. Now, there's absolutely no evidence for that proposition at all. And some of the things that are enjoined by the Ten Commandments, such as not envying other people's property, which in my view is a great spur to innovation, as well as a thought it's impossible not to have, actually don't lead to moral preachments, nor do commandments to mutilate the genitals seem to me to be moral preachments, nor does the idea of terrifying children with stories of hell appear to be moral. There's a great deal of wickedness that's attributable purely to religious belief. Morally normal people wouldn't do these things if they didn't think God was desiring them to do so.
Mark,
so I return the question in that form.
So then, for you, our morality is something that has come by way of evolutionary process. Did I get that correctly?
Yes, it's necessary for human society to evolve. Yeah. That there be certain, and it's found in all societies, whichever god they worship, or whichever cult they practice, that courage is respected, cowardice is not, murder is forbidden, theft is very much frowned upon. There are different sexual mores, not very, very widely different. The incest taboo seems to be very common. So does the one on cannibalism. I mean, the societies that don't follow those teachings, or rather follow, it's not teaching. I mean, societies that violate those laws tend to die out of horrible diseases or of inbreeding.
But I would pose the question to you both: child exposure, common in the ancient world, still common in some societies, practiced widely in China today, is not considered immoral in those societies, but does it offend your conscience, Christopher, given that you're concerned about, you've referenced a couple of cruelties to children?
Yes, it does, and I have to say it rather startles me to think of a society where that wouldn't be the case.
Well, I agree with you on that. I think my point would be that you have perhaps explained why we are moral, namely that it comes from evolution. I don't know that you've provided an adequate explanation for why we should act morally if indeed we don't agree on what morality is. The case of infant exposure would be a good one. But my point would be further. It's an interesting example because in my church, and mostly I'm a pastor, in my church we're very involved with a group in China of Christian people who are there quite precisely to save young children, usually girls, who have been left exposed and to die. And in this case, it isn't just a humanist impulse or conscience, but it's a very specific response to the view that they are precious in the eyes of God and that we are called to reach out to those who are lowly. So at least in some cases, the ones that I'm most familiar with, we have a rationale for being moral and examples of people being moral quite specifically because of their, in this case, Christian conviction.
Very well. And I wish great luck to your friends, and there are many other Christians I know who do marvelous work in North Korea, for example, with the people who are trying to escape from a prison slave state there, and also for keeping the issue of Darfur in front of the public. I think the evangelical movement deserves a great deal of credit. But here's my challenge, which you don't have to answer now, but let's say I'd love an answer by the end of our discussion. You have to name a moral action taken or a moral statement uttered by a person of faith that could not be taken or uttered by a non-believer. I haven't yet found anyone who can answer me that. There's a perfectly good secular reason for opposing, especially the exposure of girl. It's often worse than exposure, by the way, in China. I mean, the burial alive or the stifling of girl babies. I mean, it will in the end mean there aren't enough women. There's every reason why the Chinese are going to discover it. I mean, alarming. I wrote this in Vanity Fair once. An officially communist society will very soon have no word for brother or sister, let alone uncle or aunt. And that word, that, as they say, will not stand.
But it is
changed. They'll discover that they've ruined their own demography.
But is
as well as having done in the meantime things that are revoltingly cruel. But when you talk about innocent children, remember it is surely the scripture that tells us that children are born in original sin and are imps of Satan.
A minute to the break.
I've never read that imps of Satan part in my Bible before, but maybe I missed it. Now, my point would be that, Christopher, you would explain the fact of human conscience in light of evolution. That may well be true. I would actually say something I know you don't believe, but you and I can differ on all kinds of things, that your innate morality is in fact quite a real remnant of your having been created by a moral God. And that one of the reasons that your arguments work, appeal to common conscience and stuff like